Jealous SIL kidnapped my daughter to teach me a lesson because my baby would steal the attention from her miracle baby. But now she's spending her night in jail instead. I've been married to my husband, Lucas, for the past 5 years. We met through a blind date set up by our mutual friends. I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical about the whole idea of a blind date at first. The thought of meeting someone I knew nothing about and trying to make a connection seemed daunting. But from the moment I met Lucas, there was something between us that just clicked. What started as a casual evening turned into something much more significant. As we began spending more time together, it became clear that we shared a connection that went beyond the surface. There was a natural ease in our conversations, a comfort in each other's presence, and a growing list of things we found in common. It didn't take long for both of us to realize that what we had was special. Our relationship quickly grew from casual outings to something deeper and more meaningful. We started talking about our hopes, dreams, and the future we wanted to build together. Eventually, after months and months of dating, we decided to take the next step and got married. Surrounded by our closest family and friends, we pledged our lives to each other in a heartfelt ceremony. Our wedding day was filled with so much love and joy. I can still recall every detail of the day, the look in Lucas's eyes as I walked down the aisle, his brother, Kyle, cheering us on as his best man, the laughter of our family and friends, and the feeling of pure happiness that enveloped us. That day truly stands as one of the happiest days of my life, a moment when everything felt right, and the love we had for each other was celebrated in the most beautiful way. Right from the start, both Lucas and I had always wanted children. From the early days of our relationship, we had discussed becoming parents, and it was a dream we both shared deeply. We imagined a future filled with the sounds of little feet running through the house, the laughter of children filling the rooms, and the joy of nurturing and guiding a new life together. However, as much as we longed for it, the journey to parenthood turned out to be much more challenging than we ever anticipated. For what felt like an eternity, we tried everything to get pregnant but were unsuccessful. We meticulously tracked my ovulation, planning every aspect with hope and anticipation. We made significant lifestyle changes. Both of us gave up drinking and smoking, habits we knew could affect our chances. We committed to regular exercise, becoming almost religious in our approach to fitness. We also took a hard look at our diet, making sure we were eating all the right things to create the best possible conditions for conception. But despite our efforts, the result was always the same. Month after month, we were met with disappointment. We couldn't understand why it wasn't happening for us when we were doing everything right. Eventually, we decided to seek medical advice. We both got thoroughly checked out, hoping for some kind of explanation or solution. But when the results came back, the doctors told us that there was nothing wrong with either of us. They said everything looked perfectly normal, and that sometimes, it just takes time. Their advice was to be patient and trust that the process would work someday. Hearing that was both a relief and a source of frustration. On one hand, it was comforting to know that there wasn't an underlying issue preventing us from conceiving. On the other hand, being told to just wait and see felt so uncertain. Patience, as they say, is a virtue, but it's not an easy one to practice when you're waiting for something you want so desperately. Lucas and I continued to dream about the day I would finally see that positive pregnancy test and how we would celebrate that moment. As luck would have it, last year, our patience finally paid off. It started with me missing my period, which wasn't entirely unusual, but then I began to feel sick in the mornings. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life was busy, and I just brushed it off as stress or maybe a little bug. But then, my best friend Vivian heard about my symptoms. She immediately sensed something I hadn't dared to believe yet and rushed over to my place with a handful of pregnancy tests. When she showed up at my door with those kits, my heart started racing. Could this really be happening? As I ripped open the first kit, both Vivian and I were shaking with excitement. I was already crying, the mere thought of finally being pregnant overwhelming me with hope and joy. And then, it happened. The test confirmed that I was pregnant. I remember staring at those 2 lines in disbelief. Vivian and I started jumping up and down in joy, screaming and hugging each other as the realization hit us. We couldn't believe our eyes. After all the months of waiting and hoping, the moment had finally arrived. That evening, I knew I wanted to make the moment just as special for Lucas. My husband had been on this journey with me every step of the way, and I wanted the news to be a memory we would cherish forever. With Vivian's help, I planned a sweet little surprise. We decorated the living room with balloons and bought a small cake to celebrate the news. It was simple but perfect. When Lucas came home from work that night, he was immediately puzzled by the festive decorations. He laughed, asking me if I had somehow mixed up the dates and thought it was his birthday. I just stood there, smiling, trying to contain my excitement. Instead of answering him, I simply handed him the pregnancy test. It took a second for him to fully register what he was holding. But then, I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. His expression changed from confusion to shock, and then to pure, unbridled joy. He yelled in excitement, and before I knew it, he had swept me off my feet and was spinning me around in a hug. After everything we had been through, all the waiting and hoping, we finally had the answer we had been longing for. We were going to be parents. Throughout my pregnancy, after every appointment with my gynecologist, I would come back home, beaming with joy, clutching the latest ultrasound picture of our little baby. I would immediately place them on the fridge with our magnets, creating a growing collage of our journey. Every time I walked by, I glanced at the images, and it would fill my heart with so much happiness, a constant reminder that our little Cece was growing and thriving. Lucas and I spent a lot of time preparing for our daughter's arrival. We took on the task of decorating the nursery together, carefully selecting colors, furniture, and little decorations that would make it a warm and loving space for our baby. We went shopping for baby clothes, each tiny outfit a testament to the excitement and love we already felt for her. We also picked out strollers, car seats, and all the other essentials we'd need. Every decision was made with so much care and thought, imagining how it would all come together when Cece finally arrived. After reaching the 12-week mark, which felt like a significant milestone, Lucas and I decided it was time to share the news with our families. We wanted to do it in a way that felt special and personal, so we planned a small dinner at our place. We invited only our closest family members, under the pretext of a casual gathering. No one had any idea what was coming, and we were so excited to see their reactions. The evening of dinner arrived, and the house was filled with the warmth and chatter of family. As I looked around, I noticed that Lucas's younger brother, Kyle, had arrived with his girlfriend. I was a little surprised, to be honest. We had specifically mentioned that this was going to be a gathering of family members only, and it threw me off that he had brought a random woman without checking with us first. But knowing Kyle and his spontaneous nature, we decided not to make a fuss about it and just let it go. Kyle introduced his girlfriend, Jasmine, to everyone at the dinner. She was a divorcee with a child from her previous marriage, and it was obvious that she was significantly older than Kyle. They had apparently met at the gym recently and hit it off. Throughout the evening, both Kyle and Jasmine kept behaving like horny, little teenagers. They kept grabbing each other, kissing, and making noises that were hard to ignore, especially in front of everyone. It was more than a little uncomfortable, and I could sense that I wasn't the only one who felt that way. Despite this awkwardness, I was determined not to let it derail the evening. As we all sat down for dinner, Lucas and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that it was time. We stood up, and Lucas cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "We have something to share with you all," Lucas said, his voice full of excitement. With that, I brought out the collection of ultrasound pictures that I had been collecting. As I held them up for everyone to see, I announced with a smile, "We're pregnant." For a moment, there was silence as everyone looked at our faces, processing what we had just said. Then, the room exploded with joy. Everyone jumped up from their seats, rushing to hug us, congratulate us, and share in our happiness. The atmosphere was suddenly electric with excitement and love. Lucas's parents were especially thrilled. This was going to be their first grandchild, and I could see the pride and happiness shining in their eyes. They had known how hard we had been trying, and this news meant the world to them. My own mother was in tears as she hugged me tightly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion as tears streamed down her face. I nodded, smiling through my own tears. "Yes, Mom. I'm more than okay." My brother and his wife hugged Lucas and me, expressing how thrilled they were that we were finally going to be parents. They couldn't wait to help us out and share tips for being first-time parents. I confessed how nervous I was and how I kept overthinking every decision. My brother reassured me that he felt the same way before my niece was born, and his wife nodded in agreement. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the love and support of our family. This was what Lucas and I had dreamed of, and now, surrounded by the people we cared about most, it was all coming true. The evening had been filled with so much joy, but there was one person who stood out like a sore thumb: Jasmine. While everyone else was celebrating and sharing in our happiness, Jasmine sat motionless in her chair, glaring at us with a look of unmistakable anger. Her reaction was so starkly different from everyone else's that it was impossible not to notice. I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy about it. When Kyle came over to hug me, I took the opportunity to quietly ask him what was going on with Jasmine. I wondered if we had somehow offended her, though I couldn't think of anything that might have caused such a reaction. But Kyle just shrugged it off, telling me it wasn't a big deal. He seemed completely unconcerned, as if her behavior was something he was used to. As the evening progressed, we all moved to the living room to enjoy dessert and wine. Naturally, I refrained from drinking, and Lucas joined me in solidarity, choosing not to drink as well. We all settled in, and the conversation naturally turned to babies and pregnancy. I shared details about the nursery we had been putting together, feeling proud of the little space we were creating for Cece. Throughout all of this, Jasmine had remained silent, barely participating in the conversation. But then, out of nowhere, she suddenly spoke up, asking if she could see our nursery. Her request caught me a little off guard, but I didn't see any harm in it. After all, she was a parent herself, and I thought perhaps she might have some helpful suggestions or tips. So I nodded and told her she was welcome to take a look, and I escorted her to the nursery. As we entered the room, I watched her closely and noticed that she didn't seem impressed at all as she viewed the room. Instead, she started pointing out things she thought were wrong with our nursery. She criticized our choice of room, saying it was too well lit for a baby to sleep in, suggesting that we hadn't thought it through. I calmly explained that we were planning to install roll-up curtains to darken the room whenever the baby needed to sleep, but she barely acknowledged my response. Next, she had an opinion about why we had chosen to color the room yellow, instead of a more neutral color. I was taken aback and told her yellow was just a color and it had nothing to do with someone's gender anyway. Then, she turned her attention to the baby clothes we had neatly arranged in the drawers. She scoffed at them, remarking that her son had never liked clothes like these and that we should have consulted other parents before buying what she called cheap knockoff versions. Her tone was dismissive and condescending, and it took me by surprise. Up until that moment, I had been trying to be polite, assuming she might just be a bit blunt, but this crossed the line. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked her, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. Her words stung, especially after all the effort Lucas and I had put into making everything perfect for our baby. It was clear she had no intention of offering any constructive advice. Instead, it seemed like she was deliberately trying to undermine the happiness of the evening. Just as Jasmine was about to respond, my mother and mother-in-law walked into the nursery, their faces lighting up as they admired the room. They began to gush over how beautiful everything looked, and for a moment, their warmth and praise filled the room, softening the tension that had been building. However, I wasn't ready to let the issue with Jasmine slide. I turned back to her, repeating my question with a firm tone. "What exactly did you mean by that?" Both my mother and mother-in-law noticed that something was off. Sensing the unease, my mother asked me what was wrong.